Okay. I just wanted to make sure because I don't want to cut anybody off. We really want to have that like listening and interacting and yet giving everybody a chance. So I there's so many things on my heart is the truth. So many things that I feel like I want to share, but I think it's going to take weeks. I don't think it can be tonight. Um, uh, and I want us as a church to start realize like there's some history that I want to share with you about the the movement, the church, the ICOC, the sort of back in the day and where we come from. And I think that there's a history, and I think that honestly, I think we've been incredibly slow to really engage in Jesus' full ministry and to really embrace social justice ministry. And so I think that there is quite a bit of history. I come from the traditional Church of Christ. That is our roots as a group. And as Steve and I grew up, and then as we got older, one of the things that happened, and I think this will be interesting to you guys, but I'll kind of go through it quickly, but was that there was something called a social gospel. And that was considered bad. Okay. Some people preached a social gospel. And what that meant back then in our minds, okay, was this concept that they just help people that are like they meet people's needs, physical needs, maybe emotional, like encouraging, whatever. But they really neglect um, like the Great Commission, they really neglect teaching Jesus and helping people find faith and become Christians. And so, in our, like I said, in our minds, like there was this focus that we were supposed to have that was really different. And then eventually, social there was so much with social justice kind of issues, and we came to a point, I think, where there was a lot of excuses, like or misunderstanding. And I don't say this as an excuse. I just sometimes want us to understand our history and realize how far off in some things we've been, because we need to learn. It's like we were at a time where we were questioning everything. What does it mean to follow Jesus? Like questioning all kinds of things and feeling really like we need to remember truth or tradition. Everything that would come up, we would try to ask ourselves. And so, but it's like when we talked about, feeding the hungry, we would be like, okay, that means hungry spiritually, hungry for the gospel, like prisoner, like visit the prisoner or set the prisoners free, or we would think in terms of prisoner to sin. And then, like the oppressed, we would think in terms of the darkness was oppressive and that we need to help people find Jesus and become disciples. The poor, we would think, well, a poor spiritually needing Jesus. See, and I say all that because I think that's pretty. I mean, when I think back and realize that that's how we kind of justified it, that's how we thought about all of it, that I realize that we just had a way that we looked at things, and it's all proof texting is always dangerous, and it's gotten us in trouble in so many areas, and I'm sure we'll continue to in some ways, but we have to really learn to not proof text and to take things in context and to think through and try to see the world through Jesus' eyes. So in that, I just tell you guys that because then, like in I guess it was the 80s, we figured out, well, that's not right. That doesn't sound good. And that's when we started thinking, well, Jesus wanted us to feed people and love them from the heart and meet needs. Well, that's when hope. Okay, we started hope, and hope was developed, and that was awesome. But then that almost in some ways became, I think, like the excuse to not do anything else as a church. And I don't mean that in a condemning, judgmental way, but I just mean that sort of replaced, I think, in some ways as understanding and then growing and grasping social justice. And you say, well, what is social justice? I when I think of social justice, I don't think of politics. I don't think the way we use the term social justice now is not politics per se. I think that it is, and Steve and I spoke a few weeks ago and talked about we had come to the belief over the years we should be apolitical. And then back several years ago, we realized that that is our privilege talking. Like we were privileged enough to be able to choose to be apolitical because our lives, the lives of our family, didn't depend on so, there being some sort of work in the community, something that needed to be accomplished or faced down or challenged or stood up to. And so we were very convicted and realized that we needed to rethink a lot of things in the world and our worldview. So I wanted to go through a little bit of that because I feel like there's some people in our church and our fellowship that maybe wonder where all this comes from. And I think that we need to embrace a social justice that is truly um, what Jesus teaches. Social justice is love and compassion and caring about your neighbor, loving your neighbor, meeting needs. I mean, one of the things is one of the definitions, it's working to protect the life and the dignity of all people, the poor, the vulnerable, the oppressed, and the unloved. It's like, I, what that is Jesus. That's what he was all about. And so in the weeks and the months to come, I want us to just really look into and study some things about the heart of God and how what God felt and believed through the Old Testament, and of course still today. He's the same forever. But what he taught even in the Old Testament about justice and mercy and righteousness, and how appalled he was when people didn't intervene for the oppressed or the poor. And there's a lot of those passages. And then just to look at Jesus, and how from the very beginning, that's who Jesus was. That, right from the beginning of his ministry in Luke 4, he began to, by saying, I am the fulfillment of this prophecy. You remember. And it was basically that he came to help, to assist, to care for the poor, the prisoners, the oppressed, the brokenhearted. And, you know, it, and then he went on and he worked, he got women to follow him as well as men. And that was just huge back then. We've done a lot of study about that and understanding how Jesus just really was radical, and he fought against sort of the cultural norms. And he stood firm, he stood up, he stood loudly, spoke loud for people and for those that were the disenfranchised, those that have been marginalized. But I the thing tonight that there's just this last little bit that I want to share, and we don't have to read about it, but I think it's the scripture that is so powerful is the Samaritan, the Good Samaritan. And in Luke 10, there's the passage about the Good Samaritan. I've had that so much on my heart this week. And one, it was Jesus just crashing through racism, prejudice. He used the Samaritan, who were the people, the race, the mixed race that were really hated, despised by the Jewish people. And he used the Samaritan to be the hero in the story. But it's like they're discussing the words that we love. That the most important commandment: love God with all your heart, soul, mind, and strength. That's the most important. And then the second is to love your neighbor as yourself. And of course, there's a guy that says, "Well, who's my neighbor?" And I would love to think that maybe he was just having a good attitude and he wanted to make sure he got what Jesus was saying. But I kind of wonder and think that probably that's not it. Probably instead it was more of a, let's say, what's the bare minimum requirement? It's like, who is my neighbor? It's like, let me think, what exactly are you asking of me? And then Jesus tells the story. And I think that when Jesus tells this story about this man that's been beaten up and he's been stripped and beaten up and left, robbed and left for half dead, um, Jesus is painting a picture of what it means to love our neighbor, what it means to love each other. And the picture's so vivid and so convicting. Because remember, the Levite goes by and just passes the man by and doesn't help. The priest passes by and doesn't help. The people that you think would help, that it's kind of theirs to do. Of course, the Levi and the priest, I mean, they were Jews, and the man that had been beaten up was Jewish, and that's the sort of the assumption in the story. And so they should have helped their fellow Jew, but instead they ignore him. And so the Samaritan comes by, and instead of just going on by and looking around like, oh, this is terrifying, wonder who did that to this guy, oh my goodness, what will they do to me if they catch me, instead of just racing on. I mean, he had a donkey, he could have just ridden fast and got to where he was going and passed this guy by. Instead, he stops and he takes care of this man. In fact, he gets in and like cleans out the man's wounds. Now that's getting involved. That's like blood on your hands, and like it says he poured oil and wine onto like disinfect. It's like he really bandages, like he helps this guy, and then he doesn't just leave him there hoping somebody will come by now to help. No, he puts him on his donkey. So now this guy's got to walk. And so he puts him on his donkey and he takes him to an inn. And then he takes the guy in and pays them a lot of money to take care of this stranger that, if this guy was conscious, would probably be so mad that he had been touched by a Gentile, that this Samaritan had actually even touched him. That's how bad the race relations were in that time in this place. And yet he goes in and just loves this guy. Really, I think he treated him the way he would want to be treated. And that's what Jesus is illustrating. And then he leaves and he tells the innkeeper, whatever, you spend to take care of this man, I'll pay the rest of it when I get back. So in my mind, I'm thinking, what does Jesus say we need to do to love our neighbor? Because he says that's like super important, right? Love your Lord your God and love your neighbor. How do we love our neighbor? Well, Jesus says it's going to be messy. It's going to be dangerous. It's going to be probably very uncomfortable. This guy could have felt like, why am I the one doing this? This is so uncomfortable, costly, risky, sacrificial. It's going to take time, your time. It's going to take so much sacrifice sometimes to really love and help. It's going to be taking responsibility for things sometimes that don't feel like it's your business. Sometimes I've heard people say, well, this is not my problem. This is not my fight. Or this is not, I hate that all that's happening to people. That's terrible. But, it's not really mine to fix. What can I do? Well, that's exactly what this guy could have said in the story. But instead, he jumps in, he inserts himself into the situation, which is incredibly uncomfortable. And I think, wow, by this point, I'm like so convicted. I feel like I need to cry. How do we love people like that? And I know that Jesus sets that bar, that standard really high. And that's good because we won't meet it, we won't reach it, but we can always see it. It's like reach for it and try. So then in each situation, that's where we're going for. And I think that it just makes us all better. So when I look out there and I look on TV and I see what, all of this, I can think, wow, Jesus' definition of love my neighbor is really being willing to get involved, to stand up, to get messy and uncomfortable, to maybe face danger, but to do whatever it takes to love that neighbor the way I would want someone to love me, to treat my neighbor the way, and this was a stranger in his story. So, but to treat people the way I want to be treated. So that takes empathy, it takes compassion, it takes caring. And yes, it can be exhausting and terrifying in a lot of ways. And yet, we as disciples of Jesus have got to keep Jesus before us because he loved people enough to get involved in things and to make every effort to spend himself in behalf of others. And that was the picture that Jesus just painted with words. He made the story up as far as we know. And yet, that's even more convicting to me. Jesus didn't just think of a good example, he like crafted a story that will paint a picture for me to know what he wants me to do, like how he wants me to love and to what extent. So he forgives us when we don't measure up. He's got our backs. He's filled with grace and mercy, and I'm grateful. We don't need to live in this guilt all the time. As far as I can't, I could never love anybody like that. I'd have trouble loving my family, maybe like that. I don't know, but I don't say this to make us just feel bad about ourselves, but to inspire us to want to do better, do more, figure out how I can serve, how I can help. So, anyway, there's so much I don't know. I don't know how to say the right things with the right things, words even. But I know that, and I know there are a lot of us that feel that way. A lot of people, maybe of every color, but definitely white people right now. They're just feeling like, I don't know. I don't, I'm scared of it. I want to help, but I don't know. And I get it. And I think that the truth is we just don't know together and yet we can try. We can get out there and try and be willing to listen and hear and to see things from the perspective of the people that need help, to see the world through Jesus' eyes. And what he did very obviously is see the world through the people that really needed that help, which is all of us spiritually. So we're so grateful that he was willing to do what he did. So I don't want to share anymore. I don't want to talk any longer, but I would love to know anybody's just thoughts about it. It can be your personal experiences. It can be what you've been through. It can be your pain, your sad, whatever, or it can be just what you're learning, what you think about the passages, what you think about the church being involved in social justice, or to think that that's what we've got to think through and work through and figure out how we can help.